Thank you everybody for joining us. This is Fasten FEMA Funding with TARP, the Winter 2025 Hazard Mitigation Funding Technical Assistance Workshop. We're hoping to discuss FEMA funding opportunities that are anticipated to come soon. Sean is going to kick us off in about a minute. Sean's our acting executive director for the Center for Community Systems here. And also feel free to put your questions in the chat feature. And, we can kick this off by, telling us where you're joining from. So I'm here as well as Sean in Newark, New Jersey. And hope everyone is staying as warm as they can and braving the cold.
Want to get started, Carrie?
Yes.
All
yeah, Sean,
righty.
you want to kick us off?
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Fasten FEMA Funding Hazard Mitigation Funding Technical Assistance Workshop. As Carrie mentioned, my name is Sean Vroom. I am the Acting Executive Director here at the New Jersey Institute of Technology's Technical Assistance for Resiliency Program, or more commonly referred to as NJIT TARP. Presenting today will be my colleague, Carrie Martin, who's an environmental sustainability planner here at NJIT. Carrie has over 5 years experience in the public and private sectors, where she's assisted numerous state, regional, and local government entities assess and reduce their risks to natural hazards and climate threats, as well as identifying potential mitigation projects and applicable funding sources. Carrie holds a master's of city and regional planning and a graduate certificate in coastal climate risk and resilience from Rutgers University. She received her bachelor's degree in public policy and environmental policy from William and Mary. She's also a licensed certified professional planner. Next slide, please, Carrie. So what is TARP? The TARP program provides technical assistance to New Jersey communities in the preparation of applications for FEMA mitigation funds, as well as identifying projects that can help communities be more resilient. We do this by reviewing your hazard mitigation plans for feasible projects. We can work to connect you with resources that you needed to scope your projects. We can help you assess your project's funding eligibility. We can help you evaluate your proposed projects against federal and state priorities and scoring criteria. And by reviewing your draft applications and providing feedback on strengthening those applications. We can also help you by sharing successful case studies, sometimes seeing somebody who's and hearing, getting information from somebody who has been successful in this process can be extremely helpful. It's just one thing before we move forward. I just want to make it clear that we don't speak on behalf of FEMA and what they ultimately view as viable projects. That's their decision alone. We're simply here to help build community capacity in identifying appropriate projects and assisting applicants in the preparation of their grant applications. So now that you have an understanding of TARP, what I'll do is I'll pass it over to Carrie, who's going to be discussing FEMA's Hazard Mitigation Assistance Program. She's going to talk a little bit about the status of the current NOFO for FEMA funding opportunities. She's going to talk a little bit about project eligibility and project competitiveness. So with that, Carrie, take it from here.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Sean. So just to make sure that everybody's on the same page, let's just talk about hazard mitigation assistance and what that means. So hazard mitigation is any sustained action taken to reduce or even eliminate long-term risk to both people and property from natural hazard events and their effects. Natural hazards can include things like flooding, extreme heat events, extreme cold events, severe weather, severe winter weather, wildfires, and others. But mostly here in New Jersey, we're talking about flooding, severe weather, such as thunderstorms, severe winter weather, such as blizzards and nor'easters, and of course, extreme heat during the summer. So FEMA has the natural hazard or the Hazard Mitigation Assistance Program, which aids state, local, tribal, as well as territorial governments in planning and implementing hazard mitigation. And there are 2 non-disaster grants that are available annually generally, and that's Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities, or BRIC, as well as Flood Mitigation Assistance, which is FMA. So the current programs I would characterize as under construction. So as on February 13th of this year, the notice of funding opportunities that were originally posted on the 6th of January were no longer publicly available. So all of the information that I'm providing today is up to date of today and is based on the information that was made available as part of those notice of funding opportunities. We are anticipating that these notice of funding opportunities are going to be re-uploaded after they are put in line with the goals of the new administration. So this presentation, again, informational purposes only, based on information that was provided on the 6th of January and taking into account the new priorities of the new administration. In terms of eligibility, the state is the applicant for these grants. However, local governments can be sub-applicants. And so part of the reason why we're having this webinar today is we want to make sure folks are prepared as much as they can, because they need to get their projects and their materials together to send to the state, which will then be sent on to FEMA. The current deadline for these applications, again, sent in by the state, is April 18th, 2025. And so again, because of this small window and this small time frame that is currently still on grants.gov, we wanted to make sure that we had this event in order to get people information timely and prime them to be thinking about what their projects could be. In that vein, local government entities, so non-state entities, are sub-applicants. As well, they have to have a FEMA-approved mitigation plan adopted and applicable by the application deadline. So FEMA is going to review that to ensure that your project is consistent with the plan. If you're not already familiar, hazard mitigation plans in New Jersey are generally done on the county level. So your county office of emergency management will generally have that on file for you. However, your local jurisdiction will be part of that county effort, and your local, like, town emergency management should have been involved in that process, and your governing body should have adopted this county-based plan in order for your jurisdiction to count. So let's start with flood mitigation assistance. So again, as I said before, hazard mitigation can include a lot of different extreme weather events, and this funding opportunity is specifically applicable to flooding. So flood mitigation funds can be used to reduce or eliminate the risk of repetitive flooding damage to buildings and structures that are insured by the National Flood Insurance Program. So that's the flood insurance that you get through FEMA, through the federal government. So your community must be part of the National Flood Insurance Program to be eligible for this funding. In New Jersey, we have fantastic coverage, and the vast majority of New Jersey communities are part of the National Flood Insurance Program. Additionally, if you wanted to check on the status of that, you can just type in Community Status Book FEMA online, and you'll be able to double check that your community is participating in the National Flood Insurance Program. So there are a number of eligible projects that can be used in order that you can apply for FMA funding for. So there's capability and capacity building activities, localized flood reduction projects, as well as individual flood mitigation projects. So I'll go into those briefly. So first we have capability and capacity building. So these are activities that are generally done on the state level um, and the county level. So those mitigation plans that I was talking about, some of the funding can be used to build out those plans. Technical assistance by states to communities, which is what we're doing right now. Project scoping. So if your community doesn't have a project quite yet, but you have identified a repeated problem with flooding, then you can apply for funds to help you with the planning and engineering process. And some additional capability and capacity building activities. This can include building mitigation partnerships, improving local floodplain management, creating strategies, developing substantial damage procedures, that kind of thing. And then localized flood risk reduction projects. These are benefiting, again, structures insured by the National Flood Insurance Program. And these can include things like improving drainage systems, figuring out ways to redirect floodwater, and protecting sewer systems and utilities from flooding. Individual flood mitigation projects, these are talking about dealing with the structures themselves. So rather than protecting using systems around a structure, which is what a localized flood risk reduction project would be, we're talking about dealing with the structures themselves that are repetitively flooding. Again, these projects have to have a national flood insurance policy in order to be eligible. You can, if you wanted to, if there was an interested homeowner or property owner who wants to have their property bought out, that's an activity that is applicable here. If you wanted to elevate your home above flood levels, that's applicable. If you wanted to just elevate utilities, that's applicable. And then some flood proofing measures for non-residential structures like flood vents, ceiling walls, and retrofits are also applicable here. So let's talk about funding and cost share. So again, this information is current of the notice funding opportunity from the 6th of January. The available funding that was given then was 60 million. The maximum award will vary by activity. And generally for all of these, the cost share is going to be 75% federal level and 25% needs to be matched on the non-federal level, either from state funding or local funding. For localized flood reduction projects, we're talking about 420 million that could be available with a maximum award of 50 million per project. And for individual flood mitigation projects, we're talking about 120 million with no maximum award. It's important to note with the individual flood mitigation projects that if you have what is defined as a severe repetitive loss structure, and you can look up this definition, if you have one of those that's flooded many, 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 many times, you can get up to 100% of the cost of that project supported by the federal government. And then if it's a repetitive loss, then it would be 90% federal cost share. And we'll also include the notice of funding opportunity link that's currently on grants.gov in the chat now. So that's a broad overview of the flood mitigation assistance that's available. This is the BRIC funding, the Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities program. So this seeks to fund effective and innovative activities to reduce risk, increase resilience, and catalyze a whole community investment and adoption in mitigation activities. So again, the eligible projects for BRIC also include capability and capacity building, traditional hazard mitigation projects, as well as nature-based solutions. So we don't need to rehash what capability and capacity building activities are, but those are included here. Again, things like partnerships and project scoping would be applicable. Also building codes and strengthening building codes, which I'll get into a little more later. In terms of traditional projects like FMA, your individual flood mitigation projects and localized flood reduction projects would apply here, as well as non-localized. So if you wanted to make improvements to levees, if you wanted to build a flood wall, seawall, breakwaters, etc., those projects would apply to the BRIC program. And additionally, addressing non-flood hazards, as I mentioned before, your severe weather, your severe winter weather, extreme heat, that kind of stuff. And then I did want to touch briefly on some nature-based solutions. So, you have a lot of traditional gray infrastructure, upsizing culverts, improving piping. Nature-based solutions, rather than being this hard infrastructure, they kind of utilize the power of nature in order to reduce the risk of natural disasters. So we have things like stormwater parks, greenways, restoring floodplain functions, restoring wetland functions, rain gardens, green roofs, and green streets. So I'll provide a little bit of some examples of that. Here we have an image on your left of structure elevation. We kind of know what that looks like. But there are also things like coastal resilience. So planting vegetation in dunes and fortifying dunes in order to stop harsh wave action on the beach and beach erosion. That's something that could apply. Stormwater storage and filtration. I have an image of an under construction Northwest Resilience Park in Hoboken that was partially funded by FEMA. It has this amazing piping system that has multiple millions of gallons of water storage capacity, and a pumping station, which is like traditional infrastructure, but around the perimeter of the park is green infrastructure. So there are depressions in the soil and vegetation that capture that rainwater and then filter it down into that intricate underground piping system. So it maximizes the amount of rainwater that can be captured and then stored underground. And then in the bottom right-hand corner, we have a project in Bloomfield, New Jersey, the Lion Gate Park project, which has permeable pavement. So it actually allows rainwater to soak into the pavement rather than just hitting asphalt and then going straight into the stormwater system. It infiltrates into the ground. And they also did some wetland restoration in Bloomfield as well. So in terms of funding and cost share, again, as of the 6th of January, for some building code support on the state level, it's $112 million each. But the national competition, which is more applicable to local governments, there was $451 million available with a cap of $50 million per sub-application. And then up to 10% of that would be assigned to project scoping. As I mentioned before, if you don't have a fully fleshed out project, FEMA can fund some efforts to plan and make some engineering designs for a project. And funds that are not selected, they also have state and territory allocations. So the state of New Jersey itself will get some funding from this that they can dole out. If it's not already awarded out, they can reallocate it to the national competition. And again, the cost share is generally going to be 75% supported by this federal grant with a 25% non-federal match. And we will drop the grants.gov link to the BRIC notice funding opportunity in the chat now. So cost effectiveness. One thing that is imperative to note about FEMA funding, hazard mitigation funding in particular, is that you need to have a benefit cost analysis, and you need to demonstrate to FEMA that the amount of money that is being applied to this project is going to reap an equal amount of benefits. So if you're doing an equation, you want a benefit cost analysis of 1. So FEMA did do some updates in 2024. They have pre-calculated benefits for some projects. These include acquisitions, elevations and mitigation reconstruction, hurricane wind retrofits, tornado safe rooms, post-wildfire efforts, as well as hospital generators. So you can use guidance from FEMA, which we'll have a link to their cost benefit analysis website, to help you understand if you have projects that would fit into one of these categories. You can plug in these pre-calculated benefits. And if that doesn't apply, FEMA also has support to help you build out that cost benefit analysis equation that you would need for your application. So you may be wondering, what would make this project competitive, right? Because these are national funding opportunities, and you want to make sure that you're putting the best application forward. And this can also help you prioritize, if you have a number of projects, which ones you would want to apply. So this is, again, the technical evaluation criteria that was made available on the 6th of January. Things you should keep in mind are whether or not it's an infrastructure project, if you've incorporated nature-based solutions, the adoptions of building codes, and if this award is building off of previous federal awards. So let's talk about infrastructure projects. So in your application, you should explain how your project will reduce the risk to natural hazards to critical physical systems, facilities, structures, and this includes natural systems. One thing that could be helpful for you is FEMA's community lifelines. We'll include a link to that as well. So FEMA came up with a number of systems that need to be operational in order for normal society to continue to function after a natural disaster. So these include things like safety and security. So if your project supports, fortifies, retrofits, your emergency services, your police, your fire department, food, hydration, and shelter. If you have like a food distribution center, a warehouse, you want to support those kinds of things. Health and medical care. If there are major hospitals in your area and your project would support that hospital, you would want to reflect that in your application. Energy. So if you have utilities during major storms, if your above ground utilities are being knocked down and your power's going out for multiple days, if you have a project that would fortify your electric grid, this is something that you should consider. Similarly with communications, if your cell towers are going to get fortified. Transportation, for example, evacuation routes, if they're continually blocked by flooding, if your project would make that more accessible, you should explain that. Hazardous materials. There are times when flooding events in particular can damage storage tanks for hazardous materials. And so if you have a project that would support fortifying areas with hazardous materials to prevent contamination. And then, of course, water systems, making sure that clean drinking water is available to folks. I talked a little bit about nature-based solutions, but just again, if you have projects that will restore natural floodplain functions, restore wetland functions, using the power of nature in order to store, filter rainwater and prevent flooding, this is also something that FEMA might look for. And now we have building code adoption and enforcement. So luckily, as the state of New Jersey, we are definitely going to get points if your locality has adopted building codes based on our mandatory statewide adoption of building codes, which would be through the New Jersey Department of Community Affairs. But FEMA not only looks at building code adoption, but also building code enforcement. And they use that based on the BSEGS evaluation, BCEGS. So points are given if a sub-applicant has a rating between 1 and 5. You should reach out to your local building inspector or code enforcement official to determine what your BSEGS evaluation is. And if you don't have one, you would need to get a survey, and we can put the link in the chat in order to request a survey. Additionally, FEMA may give points if your project was generated from a previous scoping award or another federal award. You would just simply attach a PDF of the previous award and indicate that in various questions. And it should be noted that this is not just, if you've previously gotten an award from FEMA, but any federal grant program. So if you already did planning from HUD, from like a community block grant, or if you got, EPA funding, for example, to do some planning work, but now you want to move forward with a FEMA award, you could also potentially get points for that. So BRIC also has qualitative evaluation criteria related to it for their national competition. So after you've kind of established all of those criteria that I just went through with your projects, FEMA may also look at, the level of risk reduction that your project is going to enact, whether you have solid implementation measures, what your community engagement and outreach process looks like, and whether or not you've leveraged partners. So when you're putting together the scope of work for your sub-application, you'd want to make sure you answer a couple of questions in order to make it as strong as possible. So you'd want to answer how your proposed project will reduce risk and to what level. For example, let's say you're going to build, similar to Hoboken, an underground piping system in order to capture and store stormwater, and then slowly release it after a storm into your greater system. Let's say it holds 1 million gallons of rainwater, then you would want to state that and quantify that in your application. You'd also want to ask, how will the proposed project increase your community's ability to prepare for anticipated disasters, adapt to changing conditions, and withstand and recover rapidly from disruption? So, for example, if you have a resilience hub, one of those projects was funded by FEMA in the city of Newark. What you're doing is you're saying there's this central location, we have resources there for folks, and we're going to make people aware that if they go to this school during a disaster, then we'll have post-disaster resources available for everybody. And this will be widely known. That's something that you could state. What ancillary benefits will the project provide? So if you're doing something like wetland restoration or floodplain restoration, you could say not only is this project going to capture stormwater, it's also going to provide recreational opportunities, it's going to increase water quality, that kind of thing. And does the project consider multiple hazards? So for example, something that addresses flooding can not only address flooding, but if you're on the coast, it can also address rising sea levels or coastal storm surge, etc. Implementation measures. So does the application inspire confidence that the project can be completed successfully as designed, given the stated implementation measures? That's pretty self-explanatory. What potential implementation challenges and obstacles are identified? For example, technical, political, financial, public support, environmental permitting, etc. And what solutions are there? So you would want to have a coalition of multiple members um, in your local government talking about, is this technically feasible? It's definitely something you want to check with your engineer. Is there political will behind it? Is your governing body in support of this project? Financial, do you have grants or bonds or what have you available to support a 25% non-federal cost share? Does the public know about this project? Do you know what permits you're going to have to obtain from NJDEP? That kind of thing. And then how do project cost estimates and the schedule identify and address challenges and obstacles? So you want to make sure you have a reasonable cost estimate. Again, if you don't, something like project scoping could be helpful for you. And you want your schedule to include time that's going to be necessary for not only NJDEP review of permitting, but also because this is a federal grant, it's going to have to go through the federal NEPA process and, federal level environmental and historic preservation. And then community engagement and outreach. So this kind of goes back to, is there political and public support for this project? So you would want to answer in your scope of work, what extent did community members and stakeholders contribute to this project? What planning processes were leveraged during the development of the project proposal to advance mitigation? What outreach and engagement strategies will be used to present project information and gather feedback from stakeholders and members of the community? And how are your hazard mitigation plan and local land use requirements connected? So this goes back kind of to making sure that you have solid planning in place for this project. Again, if you're not quite there yet, you would want to pursue something like project scoping, but you should be in conversation with your local leaders and your planners, your land use planners that you have on staff. Look at your master plan, see what those goals are. Look at your county's hazard mitigation plan, and make sure that your master plan and your hazard mitigation plan are speaking to each other. And their overall goals are aligned. And there's also regional planning efforts that could be helpful. One thing in New Jersey that we have is Resilient New Jersey. So I know a number of communities on LBI as well as Newark and places in Hudson County were part of this larger planning effort where they determined what regional risks were available or were at play and came up with region-wide projects. So you can go back and see if you've been a part of those regional planning efforts and see if any of those projects would be ready for implementation. And then leveraging partnerships. So to what extent have other federal programs or funding sources been used for this project? To what extent have partners provided funding or in-kind services, et cetera, that would increase the non-federal cost share? And how have partnerships been used to increase community resilience? What community groups will participate in this project and what potential exists for partnerships to continue? So there's a number of partnerships around resilience here in New Jersey and a number of resources at our disposal. Not only is NJIT TARP here available to help you put your application together, and there are other resources at NJIT, but also Rutgers has their NJ Adapt platform, with a lot of planning tools that can help you. There's for our coastal communities, there's the New Jersey Coastal Resilience Collaborative that has a lot of programming around resilience and can be there to provide some educational opportunities and a lot of interested parties at the state level as well as nonprofits that you can partner with in order to advance your project. So this is what a non-scoping hazard mitigation assistance sub-application would have to include. You want to establish your eligibility. You want to identify what your mitigation activity is. Also note any alternatives that you took into account. You want to make sure that you establish that it's in conformance with the mitigation plan. So if your project's already listed in your county's hazard mitigation plan, fantastic. If it's not, you can work with your county to add your project. And you can also note that your project is in conformance with the goals and objectives that are going to be in that mitigation plan. You're going to have to include a scoping narrative. We talked about the questions that you want to make sure you address in that. Again, like any grant, you have to have a scope, schedule, and budget. Your cost share information that demonstrates how you're going to meet that 25% non-federal cost share. Cost effectiveness information that goes back to what I spoke about with the benefit cost analysis, showing that the money that you're getting is going to reap an equal amount of benefits. Establishing that this is technically feasible and effective in order to reduce the risks that you've identified. And again, making sure that it's in line with environmental and historic preservation guidelines at the federal level. So my final takeaways from this, again, I want to reiterate that on the 13th of this year, the notice of funding opportunities from the 6th of January were no longer publicly available, and that this information is up to date as of today, but is subject to change. We will keep you abreast of the situation, and we'll make sure that we email you when the documents have been re-uploaded to grants.gov. As well, I will mention that this assistance is made possible by FEMA grant funding, so we'll also email you regarding using the time that you took out today to help us meet our non-federal matching funds. And if you want to talk about your project in particular, if you have particular questions that you want to walk through, you can use the QR code on your screen now to schedule a meeting with me. I'd be happy to chat. You can also use the link here for scheduler.zoom.us to schedule a meeting with me directly. So I'd be happy to answer questions before we wrap up. I'm going to end the slideshow briefly and answer some questions. Okay, so does this apply to a project that a town has in planning stages? Paulsboro is building a new administrative building in a flood zone, and they have to build up so many feet in order to comply with the present rules. Yes, so another thing that we have to consider is that not only does your project have to meet federal flood rules, but it also has to meet New Jersey state flood rules. And I understand that there must be compliance with the new DEP inland flood rule. I would say collaborating with NJDEP, NJOEM, to do some project scoping so you have a good understanding of what is feasible given state and federal regulations, and getting the engineering like up to date for that. Something like a project scoping grant could help you get to where you need to be. And if you have additional questions, feel free to enter them in the chat or the Q&A box rather. I'll also mention that you may have a problem that you've identified, but you're not exactly sure what the solution would be. And I'll reiterate that there are a number of resources at the state level and at the university level, thanks to funding by the state and the federal government, that can help you figure out what the solutions would be. Again, here at NJIT, we have ourselves as well as the Center for Natural Resources, which can provide flood studies. Rutgers has the NJ Adapt platform, and they can also do assistance regarding, some preliminary mapping work that may need to be done to better understand what your problems are today and in the future due to changing conditions. There are a number of things that we can offer here at TARP. We can help you review your county's hazard mitigation plan as it currently stands and determine what projects would be priority for your community. Again, I've talked about the resources here at NJIT and at Rutgers. We can help you connect to those resources if you need additional help with scoping. We also have case studies. I talked about Newark's Resilient Hub, as well as the Northwest Resilience Park in Hoboken. Those are some case studies. And you need not be an urban community or a coastal community. These are just things that I mention off the top of my head. We can also discuss funding eligibility and ways that you can, resources that are available to help you meet that match, that 25% match. There is recently a new loan service available at the state level. The New Jersey iBank, the New Jersey Infrastructure Bank, now also offers resilience loans for your hazard mitigation project. So that's another thing to help you meet your 25% federal cost share match. And we can also evaluate proposed projects against priorities and help you make sure that you answer those questions that I spoke about in your scope of work, and review your applications as well to make sure they're as strong as they can be. I see we do have a couple of more questions. Oh no. Okay, so actually, in light of the lack of questions, I think we're just going to wrap up. I'm going to talk about some additional opportunities we have here at the Center for Community Systems. So here's my information. If you want to take it down, if you have any questions, want to reach out later, you have my email. It's just my name at njit.edu, my phone number, and then if you go to njit.edu/TARP, you can also see the information that we have available on our website. I've mentioned here the Center for Community System is a collaboration. We have multiple programs. In addition to TARP, we also have NJIT TAB. So TAB is brownfields oriented. We provide free technical assistance to those interested in learning about identifying, assessing, cleaning up, and redeveloping brownfield sites. And we also have EAGLE Thriving Communities Technical Assistance Center, supporting nonprofits, municipalities, etc., finding solutions for environmental and energy challenges. We offer workshops and technical services for EPA and DOE grants. Awesome. Thank you all so much. Oh, wait, we do have a couple more questions. Yes, you can get a copy of this presentation. We will provide that to you via email. And then we also had a question about funding for schools. So you would want to partner with your municipality to be a sub-applicant. But yes, this funding can be used for school buildings. It would just be your township that would apply, but your local school board, school district, etc., would obviously be involved in the scoping and planning of the project. Awesome. And with that, I think we're going to wrap it up. So again, you can email me if you have any follow-up questions, and yeah, looking forward to meeting with you one-on-one.